Imagine if you could all do magic. Hands up who wanted to be a magician when they were a child. Hands up who still wants to be a magician when they're not a child. That's me. The topic of the conference this year is around the magic, and the magic that Laravel brings to us as developers. And I think that Laravel has a lot of magic inside it. But for me, Laravel is like the magic kit that I bought from the shop when I was 8 years old, and I used to practice magic. We all practice magic every day. We all use Laravel, or whichever platform we choose to use. And the magic that we create is as software developers. Software developers every day create magic. 100 years ago, we didn't have computers. Nowadays, this microphone talks wirelessly to those speakers. That's magic. We all create magic. My name is Ben Dechrai. I work for Auth0. I'm a security and privacy crazy person. I want to put silver foil under my head so that nobody can read my thoughts. I love working with the community and coming out. And in fact, one thing, with your permission, that I need to do before I even continue is to take a selfie. Is that okay? Smile, everyone. Wave. Thank you very much. I'm finished. Goodbye. So I want to talk to you. There are so many things in software development that happen every day. One thing I want to talk about today is migration and how we create magic in migration. And if you think back to the first piece of software that was ever written, we used the waterfall lifecycle. Hands up who uses the waterfall lifecycle today? Not very many. Agile? Many more. So we started with the waterfall lifecycle. And the thing with the waterfall lifecycle is that we create everything in one go. We start from scratch. We have nothing to start with. And we have this idea that we can rewrite the application in another technology to match the other system. Has anybody, there's this TV show that my daughter loves. It's called Nailed It, which is an expression to mean you've got it really well done. And it's a cooking show. And on the left is the cake that they wanted to make, and on the right is the cake they actually made. That's a bit like what we do with migration when we use waterfall. We've got an application that does everything we currently need, but we know we need to migrate. Maybe it's because the technology is getting old. Maybe it's because we're moving the whole company onto a new technology. Whatever the reason for migrating, with the waterfall lifecycle, we recreate the entire application and try and do exactly what we had before in a different technology, and we fail. It looks like the second cake. And on launch day, we have a fire. Everything goes wrong. Migration fails because we haven't anticipated everything that needs to be done. Maybe there's some code in the original system that we never saw. Maybe there's functionality that was never documented. Maybe there's knowledge that a previous developer had, but he or she no longer works for the company. So we don't have the entire same thing. We have that nailed it, failed cake. And then we have two options: fix in production, rollback. Hands up if you vote for fix in production. 3 very brave people in the audience. Hands up if you vote for rollback. Quite a few more. Neither of these situations are ideal, though, because we failed. We tried to do something and it didn't work. Rollback is potentially the safer option, but of course, if you've deployed so many things at the same time, maybe rollback is impossible, because maybe there's another system that's been updated that can't be rolled back, and therefore this one that's failed, which is reliant on that other system, now has to stay the same. You have to fix it in production. So we create a problem for ourselves. So let's not use the waterfall lifecycle. That's probably a bad idea nowadays for a migration. What else can we do? We could refactor. That's kind of the more agile, step-by-step process. There's a joke. I've been asked by the translators to reduce the number of jokes because they don't translate well, but I hope this one translates well. That if you want to go to your boss and you want to say, I want to rewrite this application, they'll say no, because it sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money. But if you say, I want to refactor this application, they say, well, that sounds like an improvement. Let's do that. But refactoring and rewriting are not the same. Because when you refactor, you already know what you're creating. You just have to create it. When you rewrite, you do it from scratch. And that's what we don't want to do. And the fact is that we refactor all the time. Every time our manager comes up to us and says, this feature that you're working on right now, how long is it going to take? And you say, well, I've got to do this over here. I've got to do a database migration. We need to stand up another staging environment. I think maybe 3 weeks. And the manager sits there and nods and he says, you have 1 week. And you go, oh. So we create technical debt. We take shortcuts as developers. That's not a bad thing. It's what we need to do sometimes to meet the deadline. But when we create that technical debt, we're making a promise to ourselves and our team and our company that at some point in the future, hopefully the near future, we'll fix that technical debt. We'll do it right. We'll take the 3 weeks. Maybe it'll now take 4 weeks because you do a quick fix in a week and then you do the proper fix and you roll that out as well. So you're creating technical debt. So we're rewriting and refactoring all the time anyway. So how do we refactor? The first thing we need to do is to break everything down into components. Break it into its major parts. So if you imagine this waterfall lifecycle monolith application that we've got that we're rewriting, refactoring, and migrating to another system, we need to work out what are the major parts, what are the big picture parts of that we can separate out into separate functions. Once we've got that, we can pick one of those parts and refactor that into a component. This could be a software component, which is what we do a lot of the time. The trick with this is if you're doing refactoring this way and componentizing your code, it's only going to work if the next technology supports the same type of language. So migrating from one PHP framework to another is probably okay. If you're migrating from .NET to Laravel, that's probably not going to work so well. So we go through and we find all the repeated code. And where there's repeated code, we put it into a function. And we call that more often than not. I think most of us probably do that already. Then we take those functions and we find out which ones are related. And for each one of the sets of related functions, we'll stick them into a class. Most of us probably do that already as well. What we don't do so much nowadays is we take those classes and then we turn them into a component. And this component could be an external library. So they then become separated from your application and become maintainable by themselves. But the thing is that by doing this, sometimes we reinvent the wheel. If I take a piece of software and I find all of these functions and I put them into classes and then I create a component or a package, somebody else might have written that already. So I've just wasted my time. I could have used theirs instead. And we're all familiar with Composer. You can do a Composer install and pull in a package that somebody else has written. It's all open source. You can see what's going on. You can audit it to make sure that it's correct. So find the components that exist already. Somebody else has probably already written. The downside is that somebody else has written them. Therefore, they don't necessarily do exactly what you need, but most of what you need. So in this case, rather than creating one that does exactly what you need, take that component and modify it to do what you need, but in a generic way. So you can then send a pull request back to the developer by not including any of your actual business logic, but just the generic flow of your application. Things like sending emails or doing a credit card payment, or like one of the most common ones in NPM, for example, was left pad, which just took a string and padded it. That's common functionality, but it's generic. It's not what your company makes money for doing. Your company does something bigger. So take existing libraries, which already have community backing, which means that they're creating software for you and your company. and you can also provide back to them. And then submit a pull request. So when you've made that change, submit it back to the community, and then you're helping that community grow as well. Now, if you can't find one, then by all means take the code that you've written and extract it into your own component that's generic and not specific to your business, but just generic code that you've extracted out that can be used by any other developer, and share it. Make it open source. That way you're going to be able to help others. They're not going to have to write the code. All the code that you're already using from whichever composer repository is there because others have shared their code. If you also share the code that is not, some companies say, well, we can't share our code because that's our proprietary information. That's what makes us us. You don't share that specific code that makes your business do what your business does. It's just the generic stuff on the side. You'll also get community recognition. Companies that support open source also get love back from the community. They look at that company as a shining beacon of support within the community. Companies like Microsoft have open sourced a lot of their products. Developers will love you. Also, the added benefit is that, as I was saying before, if you find a package that works mostly for you and you change it and submit a request that makes it better for everyone, other people are going to do that with your code as well. So other people are now helping your business have better code for free. And that's cool. One thing we have started doing more often now, probably more in the last 10 years, the other examples are things that most developers would probably have done in the last 20 years, maybe more even the last 5 years, is outsourcing the mundane. So anything that is not business core to your business, anything that you shouldn't necessarily need to even think about hosting, outsource it to a third party. We already do this, moving logic to the cloud. We already do this with things like static files. We've pulled JavaScript off CDNs. We store our images in like in EC2. We use Cloudflare to host our entire websites. We use GitHub Pages, and that's like a third-party system to host some of our applications. So outsource it to the web. You don't need to host it. If you're not hosting this information, it makes it easier for you to scale. How many people here have a website or a company where a client can come to your website and make a payment with a credit card or some kind of payment mechanism? How many people here who have a website that somebody can pay on have written the code that talks to the bank directly to do the credit card transaction, stores the credit card details on their server, and they have to comply to all of these government regulations about data storage? Good, no hands. We don't. We use things like Stripe. We use things like Alipay. They have integrations that allow our customers to pay us without us having to write the code or store the sensitive information about credit cards. So outsource that as well. And identity management. That's one that's starting to come up now. Obviously, I'm from Auth0, and we do identity management in the cloud. There are other companies out there as well that will allow you to outsource all of your identity management. You don't need to store usernames and passwords. If you lose all of your usernames and passwords, that's a big deal. There's a lot of press nowadays. Almost every month, there's a report of a password leak. Whole databases being leaked. So outsource that as well. So now your application looks a lot simpler. Before, I like Lego, can you tell? Before, I'm not sure if you can quite see that, we had a really complex but beautiful flower. And then over here we have a much simpler flower, still beautiful, but the detail is a lot lower because the amount of work we put into it is less. But it's still a rose. So if we can go from maintaining these really complicated systems to maintaining a simple system by migrating, outsourcing, turning things into components, open sourcing, we have a much simpler rose to maintain. And once your rows are simple, it's easier to migrate. So the example I want to give you today, I'm going to do a live demo. And I have this warning. Live demos. So live demos sometimes catch fire. And what I mean by that is they can go horribly wrong. But I still like doing live demos because I think it's more interesting for an audience to see something happening in real time. The advantage is, if it does go wrong, firstly, I have a backup, so I can show you it working. But secondly, what I want to do by showing you a demo that could potentially go wrong is to encourage you to try and experiment. Because often we don't try things in case we fail. But if we try things even though we might fail, we'll learn a lot more. So let's find out what we learn during my demo. What could go wrong? So let's start over there. Can you read that at the back? Color's good? Good. Excellent. All right, so I have here a directory that contains WordPress.zip. This is a zip file that I downloaded from the WordPress site about a week and a half ago, so it's almost the latest version, probably the latest version. I also have Laravel working and WordPress working. That's the backup I told you about, just in case the demo fails horribly. And I've got a Laravel site ready to go again as well. So what we'll start with is launching a brand new WordPress site, and I want to do it from scratch so that you know that it's a basic WordPress site. I haven't done anything to it yet. So if I unzip that, and then, there we go, change into the WordPress directory. So now here we have WordPress as usual. Because PHP is awesome, especially PHP 7, we can actually run a local server directly in PHP without having to start up Apache or Nginx or anything. So I now have WordPress running on port 8000. But let's jump over to here. So if you've ever installed WordPress before, you'll be familiar with this. It's a standard WordPress install, takes you through it through the user interface. I'm going to continue, and here it's telling me that it's about to create a database. So before we get it to talk to the database, let's just create that database so that we've got something to talk to. And I'm going to call one called WordPress. It's because of the double. Okay. So we can now go in here and configure WordPress. I highly recommend that in production, you don't have your root database password, username and password as user and pass. Probably not very secure. I think for a demo it's fine, but not in production. Just a thought. So let's run that installation. So we've got this brand new install now. We're going to call this one Migration Magic. I'm going to create an admin user. One of the things I really like about WordPress is they help you to be insecure. I'm going to set a password of admin, which it says is very weak, which is very true, but there's this very useful little tick box here saying, let me use a weak password. I also recommend you don't do that in production. I'll just put my email address in and hit install. And now if we jump back to the database, oops, user. We can see that the database has now been populated with all the tables. And success, we can now log in. Who here has ever used WordPress? Few hands. So you'll recognize this screen. Admin, admin, login. And we're logged in. So we now have a very basic WordPress site with a very insecure admin password and a very insecure database password, but it's a demo, so that's fine. It's easier for me to remember what the password is. So one of the things that we want to do now is we want to take this site and we want to migrate it to Laravel. So we've got users and we've got blog posts and we've got comments, and we need to migrate each of those over. Now, in the case of blog posts, the easiest way is always going to be to get the data out of WordPress and create a blog post table in Laravel because you're going to have to store it somewhere anyway. With comments, comments are a little trickier because comments have the message, they've got a link to the post, they've got a link to the user that posted it, or they might have a bit of information about an anonymous user because maybe the comment is anonymous, or rather from a non-logged in person. So in that case, the comment table is a little bit trickier. What I would do in that case, if I was migrating a blog to Laravel, is I'd probably look at the outsourcing model rather than the migration model. So maybe go for something like Disqus, which is a cloud-based commenting tool. They actually have an import process so that when you set up your Disqus profile, you link it to your WordPress site, and it'll actually suck in all of the comments for you. So that's really easy. And then when you deploy your Laravel site, you just say, well, this post has those comments, and you just link it in with a bit of JavaScript. It's nice and easy. So that's a good way of migrating your comments. In terms of migrating users, I'm going to use Auth0. So let's have a look at how that works. It's quite similar. Oops. Go back. Wrong button. Add new. It's quite similar to the Disqus model, where we install a plugin, it pulls out all the users, and sets it up for you quite easily. I did this demo a few weeks ago, and the internet was very slow. I'm very happy to have good internet again. So we'll install the plugin here now. What this plugin is going to do is ask us a bit of information about our Auth0 profile. So I already have an Auth0 profile over here on the left. Because WordPress supports plugins, the plugin's actually quite well written and will do all of the work for me, which is quite nice. Obviously, Laravel doesn't have that kind of plugin system with a user interface and a point and click. I mean, think of something like Drupal, which is possibly more similar and has the ability to prompt an administrator for information. In this case, WordPress is going to ask us for an API key in order to allow the plugin to talk directly to Auth0 and do all the configuration. That's magic. It's actually not magic, but let's pretend it's magic. Right, so if I come into APIs, one of the things, I'll just make that a bit bigger for the people at the back. One of the things that Auth0 comes with out of the box is this management API. So this is basically an API that you as a developer can use to configure your Auth0 dashboard without having to log in and do it with a point and click interface, which is quite useful. And if I just jump over to the API Explorer, I can copy directly this token. This token's only for testing. If you want to do something in production, obviously you get the token from the production area of the site. But I'll just copy that token in. I can now activate the Auth0 plugin. And this is now going to start the wizard that will configure Auth0 for us. So I just want a standard installation. I don't have an enterprise account. And the standard setup, this should actually be called the magic setup. You've got the manual setup. I'm going to go with magic. So this is where we type in the domain, my domain at Auth0, and then I'll paste in the token down here. And if everything goes to plan, this is usually where the demo might possibly start burning. If everything goes to plan, I'm now going to be asked to confirm the import of my admin account. So at this point here, I can type in the password. So remember the first time I installed it, I put in the password admin. That wasn't a great idea. It's a bad password. Immediately, because we've installed Auth0, there is password complexity in there now. So I have to put in a complex password. So I'm going to put in I don't know if you can read that at the back there. Capital P, a 0 for the O, and an exclamation mark at the end. It's one of my favorite complex passwords. Again, I don't recommend using that in production, but it's a good one when you're testing login systems because it's got the capital, a number, and a symbol. So if I change my password to that now, done. So now if I log out, and log back in, immediately you'll see that the login page has changed. This is now the Auth0 login. So I'm being asked for my username and password, which is what I just set up. You can see at the top there, it's actually hosted by Auth0. I mean, if your boss is probably going to say, we want it to be our domain, and you can totally do that. But the point is that it's hosted on a site where the developers make sure that the chances of a cross-site scripting request or some kind of injection is really hard, whereas your website, obviously, you don't want to have to worry about that. So it's hosted in on a secure server, in a secure environment, and if I log in now, I should be able to get access to the admin dashboard. That's usually where it fails. Thank you. So you're probably familiar with an OAuth to OpenID Connect type login mechanism. If you go to a website and it says login with Twitter or with Facebook or with Google, you sometimes get asked permission to share information. When you log in with Google, for example, it'll say this website wants to know your profile information or your email address or maybe your full name or address or phone number, any of these bits of information. So this is a similar kind of setup. So essentially what the application is doing is asking Auth0 to log you in, and Auth0 is saying, are you happy for that website to know more information about you? It's asking for the profile information. So I'm just going to hit yes on this one. This will now take the profile information from Auth0 and push it back into WordPress. Now in this particular case, WordPress already has that, because that's where my user started from. But if I add another application, that's fine. So basically that's because Auth0, when you create the account for the first time, needs to verify your email address is valid. So this is now our second thing. We've got complicated password enforcement, and we've now also verified that the email address is actually mine. So if we jump over to this one, we can see verify your email. And if I come to the latest one, 2 minutes ago, verify your account. So this is sent by Auth0. And then once you're logged in, so once you've authenticated, it basically comes up and says, thanks, your email is now verified. So let's do that login again. Actually, I think it might need me to verify the WordPress site as well. Nope. Should be all right. Let's cross our fingers and hope it works. Oh, there we go. I'm logged in now. So I'm logged back into the WordPress site, but I logged in via Auth0. So now let's have a look at how that helps us with a migration. All of a sudden, we want to go to a Laravel site, and we want the usernames and passwords to be available immediately to Laravel. So let's go back and have a look at the code. I'm going to stop the WordPress server, go to the Laravel site that I've got. So this is basically a standard Laravel install. The only difference is that I have followed the Auth0 integration guide for Laravel, which takes about 15 minutes. I didn't want to bore you by showing you the 15 minutes of me typing code and copying and pasting. But essentially what happens is you end up with a Laravel site with a couple of extra files and functionality. So the main things that I need to do here is I need to grab the client ID and the client secret from Auth0, which are required in order to do the OAuth login. So let's find out where they are. If I jump back to Auth0 here, just make it a bit smaller so the menu appears again. We go to applications. We can see the migration magic application that was created automatically by WordPress. Also, what WordPress did was it created a new database of users called DB Migration Magic. And you can see that when I created if I come down to the users here, when I created my new account, this one here that was last logged in 4 minutes ago is stored in that connection there. So we've now got a separate, WordPress did all of that by magic for us. So now all I need to do is come back to the application, Migration Magic, and we'll just copy this client ID. and paste it in here. And we'll copy the client's secret and paste it in here. Now, the other thing we need to do before this will work is configure some callback URLs. So for those who aren't familiar with how OAuth works, I'll do a little bit of a hand-pointy gesture thing. So essentially, I'm using my laptop. I want to log into a server. So I make a request to the server, and the server says, I don't know who you are, but it has this client ID and secret that I just pasted in there. So what it's going to do is going to send a redirect response to my browser to say, go over to the Auth0 identity provider and send them this client ID. So then I log into Auth0, and Auth0 sends back an authorization code to me, which is mostly useless. It's just a random string, which I then send back to your Laravel application. So the Laravel application now has this authorization code, and it still has its client ID and client secret. So now what the Laravel application will do is it won't even talk to my browser anymore. It just takes the authorization code and the client secret and the client ID, and it sends it directly to Auth0, and it says, is this authorization code valid? And if so, tell me who it is. And Auth0 says, well, yes, Ben just logged in, and here's a token representing Ben. Now, the process when Auth0 redirects the auth code back to your Laravel application via the browser, there's a potential attack vector there. There's a potential for your browser or some kind of application to push information to Auth0, to your Laravel application, sorry, that's not actually valid. If somebody hacks your website or hacks your browser, or there's a malicious plugin. So we need to permit Auth0 to send the authorization code to certain endpoints. So the simplest way to do that, in fact, the only way to do that, is to configure that down here. So the allowed callback URLs, I'm going to add in port 8001. And I think, let me just copy and paste this so I know that it definitely works. There you go. So this here, /auth0/callback. So that's the URL on your Laravel site that's going to receive the authorization code. I also want to allow your Laravel site to be an authorized web origin, so you're allowed to log in. And also I want to allow your users to be able to log out. So with those three settings done, and the ID and the secret in your Laravel application, let's just start Laravel up. I'm going to start it on port 8001 because that's what I configured it as, so that we could technically have WordPress and Laravel running at the same time. And if I jump over here and we go to port 8001, we can see up here the login sign up. That was added as part of the integration guide from Auth0. So if I click on this now, it's going to take us to the login page. But a little bit of magic should happen. Cross your fingers. There's the magic. Unknown database. Something always goes wrong. I haven't created the Laravel database yet, and I haven't done the migration. That's only a small issue. Let's just jump over here, and I'm going to create, the demo Laravel. And let's run the migration and start the server again. Right, cross fingers it works this time. Just refresh just in case. All right, login, sign up. While there is one active session already. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is close the browser altogether because I've broken something. Right. Excellent. So now we're being asked to sign in with Auth0, but because we're using the same client ID and client secret, we've already got everything else set up already. So now if I log in with my secure password, for various definitions of secure, do your magic. Waiting for localhost. There we go, logged in as ben@dechrai.com. So that bit of information was returned from Auth0 back to the Laravel application. I haven't had to do any user, in Laravel you can do the quick bootstrap of the user login mechanism. I haven't had to do anything to do with that. And if we look at what is stored in the database now, this one here, you can see that we don't have a password. Normally this database would have a password, or at least the hash of the password for you to be able to log in. But instead we have a subject, SUB. So that's the standard that comes back in a JSON Web Token. And you can see that it's Auth0 and then a pipe. So basically that every time I log in, that value will always be the same that's returned. That's my unique identifier within your Auth0 implementation. So you can now use that to link all of my information within your business product with my identity that's hosted by a third party. Demo works. I can relax now. So that's essentially the story I wanted to tell you, how to make your life easier, how to perform magic when you're doing migrations. And it doesn't just apply to migrations. Everything we do every day is magic. Most of our parents have no idea what we do. My mum still has problems checking her email. And that's not because she's not good at computers, it's because she's not good at computers. But the things that we're learning nowadays are putting us in a position where we can do what to a lot of other people looks like magic. So carry on creating that magic. And I'd love to have a chat with you. If you've got any questions now, I don't know if we have time, or afterwards during the breaks. Thank you very much.
那我们谢谢 Ben 的分享，然后那接下来我们有开放 Q&A 时间，那我们开放1到2题，有大家想要提问问题的吗？好，对，旁边的麦克风就可以了。
Hello.
Okay,
sorry, ma'am. Okay.
可以问中文没关系，有没有翻译
？Okay.
对。
好，
用英文也可以。
I have magic in my ear.
那个，我想问，他可以办法用脸书登录social media 部分，他登录之后有办法使用相关的 scope 权限吗？
他们就是目前他在 AirPods 旁边有翻译在，就是跟他 translate， 所以对。
Yeah, I was just waiting for the translation.
Okay.
So the question was, can you do it with Facebook? So can you log in with Facebook through Auth0? Is that the question?
Through Auth0, but with the scope access.
You can use. So Auth0 has scopes.
Access permission.
So if you log in with Auth0, you can't. I'm going to have to take that out because it's confusing because I'm hearing the Chinese in my ear now. If you log in through Auth0 with your Facebook profile, then your application won't have access to post to Facebook. That's only for authentication. If you need authorization, so your Laravel application posts to Facebook as me, then that's different.
这样解答你的问题吗？还是你要中文翻译是吗？So can you answer it again so I can translate for
you? Sure. So when you're using Auth0 to log in with your Facebook profile, you're only doing an authentication of who you are. You're not giving the Laravel application permission to post to Facebook for you.
所以意思是说，如果从你的 Facebook 登录的话，它会给你 authentication， 但是它没有权限让你 po 文在脸书上面。
我可以设定这个权限吗？就是在他登录的时候。
Can he have the settings for the post on Facebook you said that you can authorize the Facebook account before.
I don't think you can. That's not a setting.
Okay.
So that's a separate connection that you need.
Okay, thank you.
好，那还有问题吗？这里，请问是记得拿你的麦克风，对。
Hello. Okay. I have seen you use the callback. You use localhost is just the host domain name to callback. So does also have some sort of like certification could like verify this is the real domain, but just not like localhost because the domain is very easy to forge, right?
So there's no verification done. It trusts that the domain you put in for the callback is what you intend it to be. So for localhost, that's fine for development, but in production, you would always point it back to yourcompany.com/whatever. So it's possible to do DNS hacking to make it go
so
somewhere
it would
else,
be possible for that if you don't have certificate or some checking, right?
It always has to go back to an HTTPS endpoint. It can't be sent to an insecure endpoint. So it can't be HTTP. It has to be HTTPS for the callback. I mean, obviously with localhost, I was not, but you should always use HTTP.
S.
Yeah.
It was S. Yeah. Okay. So the only verifications is just domain name. So when's HTTPS? Is what you mean?
Well, the other thing is that even if the authorization code does happen to get sent to another server, that server can really only use it if it also knows the client ID and the client secret. So there's two steps of check there. The first one is when you set up auth0, make sure that only your application is permitted to receive the authorization code.
Yes.
But also, if somebody else happens to hijack it, it's really hard to use without the secret, which only you know.
Okay, I see. I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
谢谢。那之后大家如果有问题的话，也可以会后跟 Ben 一起交流。那谢谢 Ben 的分享 ，Thank you for sharing.